Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Sid, thanks for joining me on the pod today.
Yeah, great to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Big fan of Hubspot and big fan of finance strategy and ops. And you sit at the epicenter of all the cool stuff that our fellow nerds like.
Love it. Love it. We're gonna geek out for the next hour. I'm excited.
All right, strap in for this jam session. I'm coming from the top ropes in the first one. There are going to be a lot of people in their car pounding the dashboard or window, depending on the answer. But where should RevOps sit within the organization? Is it a finance group, sales group, operations group? Where do you put it?
I'm going to say it depends, and I'm not trying to cop out on the answer. I actually think as long as it's really close to the business and not at arm's length from the business, very close to the business, understand what's happening on the ground with reps, with customers, with partners. If you can maintain that pulse, I don't think it matters where it sits, but I think that level of intimacy and understanding of the day in the life of the rep, the day in the life of a customer, partner, for example, is critical. So wherever in the org allows you to maintain that perspective, it doesn't matter. Like today, we sit at HubSpot. RevOps sits as part of our Chief Customer Officer team, which is our flywheel. It's our go-to-market team's called Flywheel: sales, marketing, customer success, and RevOps. So we're part of the go-to-market organization.
So you're pretty close to sales is what you're saying.
Very close to sales, customer success, and marketing. So that's how we define RevOps, as full go-to-market alignment across the flywheel. So really beginning of the journey through renewal, expansion, and loyalty.
It's funny because you can never please everybody with this, because I've heard criticism of if it's in finance, well, they're not out in the org enough. And then I've heard if it's in sales, they're in sales' back pocket and it's going to take too long for signals to bubble up.
I think there's I guess how you're structured and what you set the expectations of. Like, I think part of the shift between, call it a sales ops 1.0 and RevOps is that you're a co-pilot with you're co-pilot with your chief sales officer or chief marketing officer. If you have that mindset, it doesn't matter where you sit. It's thinking about, are you solving for the customer? Are you solving for the company? And then helping orchestrate the pieces and helping your leaders see around corners.
Well, you just said there, you solving for the customer. I never thought about it that way. That's a cool way to put it.
We talk about that all the time at HubSpot, like SFTC, solve for the customer. And if you work back from that, that will help you. And you really understand what your buyer's journey looks like. And we spent a lot of time thinking about that and obsessing over it. Our buyer journey, we call it CCOM, customer-centric operating model. So we have one model across our go-to-market organization where we really try to understand what are all those engagement touch points, digital and human, and then think about what are the outcomes our customers or prospects are trying to achieve at each of those different points in the journey. And then we think about who are the people, what are the capabilities to go support that.
Sid, this is a really nerdy question, but if I'm a CFO looking at the P&L, where does your paycheck hit every 2 weeks in my P&L? Are you in sales? Are you in? You probably wouldn't be in support. How do I look at that? Are you allocated? We're
an ops function within the go-to-market organization. So if you think about your question earlier, it's not reporting into sales, it's a peer to sales, but it's within the go-to-market organization. It's a peer to marketing. It's a peer to customer success, but it's part of the go-to-market organization. So you maintain some of that closeness of what's happening in each of those different teams to go deliver for that.
In my simple mind, there's always the hierarchy of where something rolls up to, and then there's where the cost hits, and they're not always the same thing. So I've had the thing before where maybe you have a business partner who's in RevOps, but they're rolling up to sales, but their cost is going to hit in G&A. So there are all different flavors of this.
So many models.
When do you think a company should hire their first RevOps person?
Yeah, I think it's when you start to, I don't think it's ever too early, but I think when you start to differentiate your go-to-market model, like if you have, a single seller and you've just transitioning from a founder-led sales model to hiring your first AE, maybe a little bit early, but you start to really think about getting your first, VP of sales or head of sales. You start to add some marketing capabilities, whether that's a VP of marketing or not. You start to have a set of customers that you need to go service and really understand what their experience looks like. So it's at that like cusp of like, product market fit and go to market fit is where I would really start thinking about this holistically. And I think there's long-term horizon type of capabilities to start thinking about. Like you can never get started too early on implementing your data stack. We're thinking about how do you want to manage, measure, and consume data across your organization. And I think we all know the longer you kick that can down the road, the harder it gets to go back in time and go sort of retrofit without slowing things down. So the data is one of those things I think is like a beginning of the journey, as you're starting to really think about the inception of the company, to really start thinking about what is your data strategy? What is that going to look like between first party and third party data? And then as you grow and evolve, there's going to be a systems strategy. What's your tech stack look like? What are your tools and capabilities going to look like? And who are they helping to either make more productive, or what customer experience is it trying to make better, right? And then I think really, when I think about RevOps, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's that co-pilot. It's that key business partner that is working in tandem, hand in hand, and helping see around corners. We spend a lot of time as finance and ops professionals on hindsight. We're getting to insight. We now need to get to foresight. And I think the foresight is, what did you learn from the insight that is going to help you predict the future and go drive and change that trajectory based on what you've learned, and staying close to the pulse of what's happening in your business? What are the pivots you're going to?
First off, I love the term co-pilot. And I don't know why I can't get this out of my mind, but I'm thinking of someone doing Baja racing in one of those cool pickup trucks in the desert. And
Yeah.
You got the sales guy driving like a madman, and then you got the RevOps guy with the map.
You're having somebody just keep them, course correcting and telling them.
Stay on the road. We're going 80 miles per hour. I like that. And I also like how you said a peer to sales. I think that's really important. And I've read a bit about this online of how HubSpot makes it very clear that this is an org with a huge say at the table. It's not you are serving people. Every org in a sense is a customer service org, depending on who your customer is in the org, but you have an equal seat at the table and an equal voice.
Yeah. And I think it's part strategy, part ops. It's a lot of alignment with finance to make sure we have our ducks in a row there. So yeah, it's in the middle of a lot of pieces of bringing strategy through to execution, for sure.
And another group that's in the middle of a lot of this is FP&A. And you mentioned finance. Can you break down how you think about the differences between FP&A and RevOps? Because one of my favorite sayings is that accidents happen at intersections. I'm stealing that from Ethan Schechter, who's the first VP of sales hire at Sneak. But I remember in my experience when we were going fast, FP&A and RevOps would clash from time to time.
Yeah, no, we work really well with our FP&A team. I think part of it is just getting really clear on what is that engagement model look like and what perspectives are each of you coming at it from. And I think if you think about RevOps, as I said, it's really understanding that ground truth, what's happening with the rep experience, the customer experience, the partner experience. How does all of that feed into our view of what the market opportunity is, resource allocation to go after that? That's a set of perspectives that I think needs to marry and sort of match the perspective of the top down in some sense. What are your growth objectives as a company? What does that multi-year financial plan look like that there's an expectation to go deliver? So I think they're somewhat different altitudes, but where the rubber meets the road in a 3-year plan is the first year of the 3-year plan, right? And it's really, because you're typically getting into planning. Planning is a jointly owned activity between FP&A and RevOps. and it's a really good, push-pull dynamic where, we know what we're trying to do, and we're going to go out there and go validate, iterate, and go test those assumptions, and then have a point of view on the feasibility, or, where there's, puts and takes. So that's how I think about it.
I love how you said the rubber meets the road in the first year of the 3-year plan, because until then, it really is just that. It's just a plan on a piece of paper. Just to maybe get a bit tactical here. So rep comp plans, where's the right place for that to sit? Is that an FP&A thing, or is that a RevOps thing?
That's a good question. Comp is one of these that is, it's got a lot of, it's a very important thing to get right. And it's such an important element of making sure you execute your strategy with precision, because it's, do you have the incentives aligned to your strategy? So this one is one, probably not surprisingly, that has a number of different areas that are involved. You have people operations from a, comp, and what does that look like from a market standpoint, competitiveness, et cetera. You have FP&A around, we're going to have a set of guardrails and what we're able to and can absorb from a P&L standpoint. And then 3, the other perspective is going to be, well, what's going to actually motivate and drive the right behavior on the ground when it comes to your reps. So I think of it as there's comp strategy and comp design. So if I think about the variable component, for example, in a rep comp plan, that's something RevOps is deciding in tandem with sales leadership or CS leadership. What's the strategy? What are the outcomes we're trying to drive as a result of that strategy? How do we make sure that cascades all the way down to reps? And there's this tight alignment. Now, in doing that, we have to go look at this from all the different sides and make sure we're doing it in a way where it's balanced from a financial perspective, from a people perspective. So that's where we work really closely with our FP&A and people operations partners. That's a true sort of horizontal. I don't think I've ever worked at a company where it only sits in one place, because that's, when you're talking about software or, an IP driven business, when people are pretty much your primary asset, you really have to think about that cost on the P&L.
Now we're cooking. Okay. This is awesome, Sid. So I'm going to jump around a bit, but one of the topics me and you were going to jam on was incentives and outcomes. And I think we've teed this up nicely. So can you just speak to the qualities of maybe a bad commission plan versus a good commission plan?
Yeah, I think one that just, from past experience, in a prior life, I ran digital sales when I was at CA, and I thought about comp plan design a lot at that time, and saying, what are the behaviors that you're trying to motivate and decide, and how does this land when it lands in front of a rep on the first of the year? And I really like to keep it simple. That's, are you sending the right message with the comp plan that the objectives for that individual are very clear and easy to understand and tied back to the strategy? So one thing I've seen is try to put too much in a comp plan, or having, a 5-part comp plan with multiple weightings. You create confusion, and you create a lack of clarity around where to spend time and be intentional about it when you're the rep. So I always like to just make it as simple as possible, but make it very clearly aligned to the strategy. I think that's simplicity and ease of understanding what is going to move the needle and how do they feel part of the success, and then participate in that financially.
I'm just thinking back at the comp plans I've seen before where they've gone wrong, and I'm reflecting in real time. I think most of those have gone off the rails because not because they were too aggressive, but because they were too complicated.
Yeah, it's if you think about the ways these can be interpreted and the lack of consistency. If you have 5 metrics, each 20% each weighting, you're signaling that all 5 of these things are equal importance.
Yeah, and I look at the percentages as what gets a rep out of bed in the morning to lean on this button versus that one. And like you said, if you have one thing that's 80% and the other one that's 20, they may just try to optimize the crap out of that 80% weighting.
That's right. That's right. It's really trying to understand. And the other, I think, good best practice is put it in front of some reps for sales leadership as you're thinking about, different comp plans. Get some feedback on how it would resonate. Maybe not all the way down to the rep per se, but certainly sales leadership. How is this going to be? If this is our objective or intent and the outcomes we're trying to drive, is this comp plan engineered to help drive that? And I think that's an important one to do. The other piece of it is, I think, if you have a simple comp plan that is aligned to the objectives you want this individual to drive, the next side is you want to create the right incentives to achieve and exceed that plan, setting the targets appropriately. So to your point earlier, it's easy to say, you want some astronomical growth on a number, but I think you go back to think about this landing in a rep's hand. What are the motivations it's going to create if it's so far out of reality? Versus, are you setting it so it's aggressive but achievable, and you're giving the incentives, accelerators, spiffs, whatever that might be, to say, we want you to not only hit this, but strive to exceed it, and you're going to participate in the upside.
How do you think about getting sales reps to that multiplier, accelerator, or upside? Is that something that's usually back-end loaded, or do you want them to be able to have a taste of that extra cash each quarter?
Either way, it depends on how you sell. It depends on how your business model works. Are they long? The conversation we were having earlier, are they long enterprise deals that have a long sales cycle and typically tend to be back-end loaded? If that's the case, you probably want it to be on an annual level. If you have more of an MRR-based business with shorter sales cycles and you want to drive more smooth linearity as you go through the year, you could look at a quarterly type of accelerator. I think that is one where it really depends on what the sales cycle looks like, what is the complexity of the sale, and it goes back to what are the behaviors you're trying to drive. In that case, you're trying to effectively drive some level of consistent linearity and not have everything back end loaded. In that case, is probably where you're going with it.
Yeah, and now I'm working at a marketplace business that's usage based with a take rate model. But I came from a world where it was enterprise SaaS deals where I think it was 60% of our year was in the second half, of which 40% was in the fourth quarter, of which 25% was in December, of which 10 or 15% was in the last week. And I still get heartburn sometimes thinking about that. And that was always when the reps would hit these massive accelerators at that time too. It was all back end loaded.
All back end. Yeah. It's interesting. And then do you sort of self-perpetuate that behavior, or is that just of the business? That's what you have to really kind of ask yourself.
I'm so glad you said that, because you are actually self-perpetuating that in a lot of ways, where you're incentivizing people to wait to get those deals in.
Yeah. And I go back to, is it, the solve for the customer, is that how you've trained your customers to engage with your company and operate? Or is the incentive actually creating the wrong behavior? It's like, if your objective is, I'm going to solve for the customer when and where and how they need it, and not going to go create sort of an artificial, deadline for that. You follow their flow and help guide that journey. But yeah, you have to, I think those are all great questions to really think about. It's what's there as a result of the incentives you put in place.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. As a SaaS CFO, I know firsthand how difficult it is to report on SaaS metrics. We've all seen a deal close at the end of the month, but the customer's contract doesn't actually start until the middle of the next month, creating the classic discrepancy between bookings or committed ARR and actual ARR, the real stuff. That's why I'm so pumped to be partnering with Maxio, a company trusted by thousands of SaaS companies to understand these reporting nuances. They basically built and automated the SaaS dashboard I tried to manually cobble together for 3 years. In 2022, SaaS Optics and Chargify combined to become Maxio, the only billing and financial operations platform that was purpose-built for B2B SaaS. They're helping SaaS finance teams automate billing and RevRec, manage collections and payments, and put together investor-grade reporting packages. Visit maxio.com/runthenumbers to learn how Maxio can help you supercharge financial operations in 2024. Request a demo using the Run the Numbers link and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/runthenumbers. Reduce burn, extend runway, do more with less. Operational efficiency. These are all catchphrases that we know all too well because of the headwinds business leaders face in today's growth environment. Growth is now a battle, not a breeze. While teams are on the front lines fighting every day for top-line yardage, there are hidden savings opportunities right beneath their feet. That's where Tropic comes into play. Their procurement platform brings order and process to a historically decentralized and chaotic business function: purchasing and supplier management. Tropic serves as the front door for procurement that your entire company will want to use. By combining intake forms, pricing benchmarks, approval workflows, and supplier management all in one place, Tropic makes savings opportunities easy to find and act on. When you pour blood, sweat, and tears into revenue growth, doesn't it make sense to protect what you have fought for? Visit tropicapp.io, that's tropicapp.io, to learn how modern businesses are controlling spend to extend their runway. Your board will thank you. Your budget will thank you. Your bottom line will thank you. That's something for finance strategy and operations people to sit back and ask themselves, am I creating an artificial deadline? Because the customers are going to be corralled into that, whether you meant to or not. Like, did you put that artificial constraint there?
Yeah, I think it's something that's a great area of like partnership, like between the teams. It's like looking at the things that are in place, the policies, the procedures. Are they driving the outcomes you want for the business? And if not, let's go understand why and what adjustments or tweaks. I think you have to reserve the right to be wrong and tweak.
When you talk about reserving the right to be wrong and tweak, how do you balance that with trying to set an aggressive goal? I mean, you have expectations that the street wants you to manage to. At other startups that are privately held, they have a board that's pushing them to some astronomical number that they put on a pitch deck 5 years ago. How do you manage these huge expectations with also being reasonable so reps don't get bummed out?
One of the things we've put in place is this concept of like always be planning or agile planning. And it's really going into the year, understanding all of the leading indicators and input metrics that go into the different parts of our plan. And we're looking at those every month, and gives us the ability to sort of like react to and say, all right, when we set that plan last year, what were the set of assumptions we had? What are the realities? Do they differ? Are they aligned? Are they positive, negative? Like what does that look like? And what does that imply for our need or desire to go do some course correction on it, and maybe go revisit some of those assumptions? Does that make sense? So if you, and I'll give an example. Like when I was this is back at CA, when I was running the digital sales business, an example there was, you set a plan at the beginning of the year, understanding what the market opportunity you think it sits across the different geos. You get into the year, you realize one market's taking off, whereas another market is really not, getting traction. And I remember having the ability to literally shift quota in the middle of that year from one place to the other, so that we were able to go hit the overall number, but got there in a different way than I thought. So I think that's where I say reserve the right to be wrong on your assumptions and understand what your objectives are and say, all right, well, if I thought this was the path to get to this outcome and, macro is not what I thought it was, or, whatever, the market dynamics have shifted. What is my point of view on those outcomes, and what is the fastest path to still get there? It may not have been the same mix that you had, 3 or 4 months ago when the plan was inked and dried,
That's great, because 3 lefts can, I guess, make a right. I don't know if I did that. I'm not good with directions. But what are some of the other reactions you could take? So you're saying you could shift from one geo to the next. What are some of the other toolkits you have to react during the year?
I think the other thing I think it's spending a lot of time on leading indicators. Honestly, I think there's still too much time spent on lagging indicators. And, if you're in a monthly business, you got to respond in near real time. So it's keeping a pulse of what are the core inputs to every part of that customer journey. And are you looking at them maniacally on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? And being able to go see where something is going to land. And if it's on a trajectory that you don't want it to be on, it shouldn't be on, what are you doing before it actually gets there? It goes back to that foresight. You leverage the insight to go drive the foresight and changing the trajectory of that leading indicator. So I think instrumenting the business with leading indicators from, beginning to end of that journey, as I called it, we call it CCOM, I think is essential. And it gives you the ability to react and respond proactively versus after the fact, responding to an outcome that you didn't want. So I think it's helping create the future on it. It's another tactic there.
That's great. You're watching the mile markers along the way to see if you get off course.
Exactly. And you're not waiting until you get to the end of the race and saying, oh, wait, I got to the wrong finish line.
That's great. So at the start of the race, you're probably thinking about the sales capacity, and you're probably also thinking about what the contribution is per rep that you put into the field. Do you have any rules of thumb around quota assignment in OTE? I've heard 4x, 5x. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I think it depends so much on your business model. Like the answer I would give you would widely vary based on, is it a enterprise business that has a heavy install base, that has a certain type of land and expand motion versus a higher velocity small business that has a heavy digital component, right? So I think to get back to some finance here, like I think it's really understanding the LTV to CAC of that particular motion. And if you understand how your customers want to engage with you in these different segments, you can then go back and say, all right, well, here's what my journey looks like for our customers in these, up market, mid market, down market. And then think about what are the right engagement points. Is it a human engagement point? Can it be digital? Is it AI powered? Like, what does that experience need to look like? And I think that helps you understand what those ratios should be. And I think the fact that digital and product-led growth are playing such a different role now than they did like even a couple of years ago or 5 years ago, the lines between go-to-market and product are really starting to blur as well.
That's a beautiful statement. Can you say more about that? How are the lines blurring?
Well, if it's a product-led motion, you might say that entire, for a particular segment of the market, you might say that I shouldn't have any reps on it. Or you might say I want, for a particular aspect of the customer journey, I would like to have, or you need to have reps answer chat queries at scale if AI can do it. So I think the bar for where as you you get to segmentation in your business and you look at, I'm thinking of a 2x2, you think of complexity and, either revenue today or revenue potential as two axes. Like, where do you probably want your humans heavily focused in that top right, and then select cases for where you want them involved in the other areas. And then you think about what are those ratios based upon where they fall in that threshold. Are they a scaled type of engagement model that can have more junior folks because of the level of sophistication, or the level of the type of work doesn't warrant someone that is more more like seasoned or tenured? I think all those things play into it. I know it's easy and it's tempting. It's really tempting to go say, here's a set of ratios and we should just go snap to it. I think you have to say, like, do the companies that make up the benchmark, do they look like mine? And not just from are they the same size? Are they the same, revenue and headcount? Do they have the same business model? Do they operate in the same markets? Do they, what are their different levers of channels of growth? So there's so many variables here that each of those would give you a very different lens than just saying, oh, it's a X, $1 million company with this many employees, so therefore I should go benchmark. And I think you have to ask some more questions. I think there's value to benchmarks, don't get me wrong. I just think it's important to understand what's the peer set that you're using for it. Do they operate or look like you, or were they at a stage in some point in their trajectory that looks like where you are today or where you want to go? And then say, okay, that may make sense. So I almost think benchmarks are one thing. I think case studies, I think, are really interesting too. To go look at other companies that are doing or are aspiring to do similar things or going at the market opportunity in a similar way. What could you learn from their journey, right? It's like you always like you talk about first mover advantage, and then it's like, well, it's actually, is it really the second mover that can learn from all the mistakes? Apple with the iPhone, right?
Yeah, I think Google was the 17th search engine to market, but it worked out well for them.
There you go. Yeah. That's exactly right. How are you crafting that experience?
What you said about benchmarks is awesome for people to consider, because there are a lot of companies out there probably trying to copy Snowflake blindly, companies like that, or copy Cloudflare blindly, but they're not thinking about, is this even the same go-to-market motion? Like I saw a funny tweet, and it said that like everybody's getting rid of their customer success departments just because, Frank Slootman at Snowflake doesn't like them. Well, it's like, well, did you actually look into the case study of, why he said that, or how they're deploying the other resources in the company? You can't just blindly follow what one company's doing.
Yeah, and he had a specific philosophy for why he did it. I read that, amp it up, and it talks all about his philosophy, right? So are you considering all the other things that went into his calculus of that philosophy versus taking it at face value?
Yeah, so case studies over benchmarks.
Yeah, as another angle to it, right?
Yeah, and I'm personally guilty of it. Like, I'm a huge benchmarks buff. I'm always writing about them and comparing different companies. But I do think that there are a lot of general benchmarks out there that don't cut the data in terms of go-to-market motion. So you'll be comparing a PLG company to a field sales company, or you'll be comparing like a usage-based model to a seat subscription-based model, and the forest gets lost through the trees.
That's exactly right. It's just, do you have the right set of benchmarks that are going to give you the right signals or right, sort of breadcrumbs on where to go look, or is it going to take you down the wrong direction? So that's a spot on.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Well, you know what I always say, maintaining compliance is never complete, which is why most security and IT teams feel like they're always in audit purgatory. I'm there right now. But there is a solution, and it's easier than you think. Escape the infinite loop by using Thoropass's compliance and audit solution. Thoropass is the only solution using AI-infused technology and in-house auditors to take your team from start to stamp without leaving the platform. As a winner of multiple G2 awards, including top awards for usability and service, your team is in good hands with Thoropass. From onboarding with dedicated experts to audits from in-house auditors who know every aspect of your framework needs, you can have complete confidence in your Thoropass compliance journey. Thoropass is the only solution to offer audits for your most needed security frameworks. I'm talking HIPAA to HITRUST and SOC 2 to ISO 27001. Woo! If you need PCI, DSS, pen tests, or any other major compliance framework, Thoropass can hook you up. With Thoropass, you never need to worry again. Relax, we fix audits. Find more at thoropass.com. That's THOROPASS.com. Tell them your boy CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Boom. Something that I have personally struggled to find benchmarks on is discounting. What's your philosophy on discounting?
Yeah, I think it's a balance of having some perspective at sort of I'll call it federal level, and having a perspective that's at a aligning with your product teams, aligning with what the market opportunity is, all the things that go into determining what pricing ought to look like that's relative to value should factor into what should those thresholds look like. And I think some type of central perspective and a pricing team, some companies have those, we have one, I think is healthy to really look at all the different inputs and go look at, are the list prices appropriate to market value and customer value? What does that tell us about discounting? And then I think balancing that with how do you give different levels of autonomy and thresholds in the field based on different use cases and scenarios. And as you start to get to the upper end of what that threshold is, it's got to have really, really good justification and might need a couple more, reviews and looks at it. But I think it's a balance of you don't want to grind sales velocity to a halt because your process for discount approvals is so onerous. At the same time, you want to be thoughtful about value, and you want to be driving the right behaviors in the field. And I think that's the balance you have to strike. It's not neither one. It's not overly rigid, but it's not overly like go do what you want either.
You're almost describing levels of the government where there's a federal level to it. And I guess that's HQ. That's at the top. What's our philosophy on it? But I think what you're alluding to is, to a certain degree, there is autonomy, maybe even at the rep level, up to a certain amount. I mean, does it have to go through different tiers? Like, how do you make it so it's not this huge admin for the org to check every single deal? Like you said, you want to trade deals for dollars to a certain extent.
So I think you're going to look at this regularly and go look at what your discounts are that are realized, and look at, are your thresholds right? And where do you feel comfortable on from a level of risk and from a value standpoint that you're comfortable with a rep making that call? Or should it go to a director? And then at what point, it's not just discount percentage, it's actually what is the absolute value or potential risk to the organization of overly discounting something. So I think the who it goes to and how frequently, I think depends on, the magnitude of how important it is. But you're right. You don't want everything going to your head of sales just because it's a discount. So I think that's where you have to revisit and look at those thresholds and say, do they make sense?
What are some of the factors you look at when a fat discount comes up to your level? Do you look at the number of years it's for? Like, what are the needle movers for you to say this justifies a deeper discount?
I think it's really understanding. Does the rep have a good understanding of why the discount is warranted, other than, it's a competitive sales cycle? If it's a competitive sales cycle and it's being used to drive the price down, I think that's a data point. But is this solution a great fit for the customer? Have they been engaged throughout the process with you, and this is the right solution for the customer to solve the specific pain points, and this is a way of being able to manage it within, their budgets and get through it. I think it's a judgment call.
And discounts are a motivation to get the buy side in, but on the sell side, the other unit economics of a deal are Spiffs. What's your philosophy here?
I think Spiffs can work as long as you're tying Spiffs to incremental behavior that you wouldn't get anyway. And I think that's the balance. Oftentimes it's like, well, let's do a spiff to focus on X product or Y product because it's a new launch. That's fine. But then I think you have to really think about, what are the implications of doing that? What does it do to the focus on the rest of the products? Are you okay with that potential implication? Would you have had focus on this product anyway because it's a new launch, it's got great product market fit, there's market pull? So that's where I go back to like incrementality of it. Is the spiff driving the right behavior? Are you okay with the intended or unintended consequences of it? And would it have not happened if you gave the spiff, if you put a spiff in place or not? So I think that incremental value side is super, super important for both, the rep has to understand how to balance that objective with their core sort of comp and broader objectives, assuming those are still the same objectives, and also give some extra push to a specific incentive. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And it all goes back to what you were saying earlier about just make the comp plan simple. Spiffs, I think, can go off the rails in a number of ways, but one of the ways is just making it so confusing that the rep is like trying to add up on a piece of paper if they're even like checking the boxes.
The fewer, more intentional actions you can direct a rep to, I think it's just going to make a lot more sense.
Fewer intentional actions. I love that phrase. Related to Spiffs, I've also seen, like, let's say we're working on this new product launch that the market's been asking for 3 years, and we're finally going to come up with it, and there's pent up demand for it. And then someone's like, let's run a spiff. And then you do it. But then you sit back and you think, like, dude, they were going to buy this anyway. They've been asking for it. Why are we running a spiff with it? Like, there's pent up demand.
Well, that's exactly it. So I think it's really understanding like what are the behaviors you're trying to drive? Will they happen anyway, with or without the spiff? And using that to really get a sense of, does this make sense economically for the company to go invest in that spiff? It's incremental dollars on top of what you already planned for. So it usually is related to, behaviors you're trying to amplify, or something net new that came up during the year that wasn't planned for. And it's very disruptive to go, change comp plans in the middle of the year. So this could be a way of, boosting something. Or I've seen companies do this in past lives where you have an acquisition, and it's a new solution that nobody knows anything about. What's the incentive to go learn about the new solution and get that through your channels? That's just another example of it where I've seen it used in the past.
Spiffs post M&A are a great tool because it broadens people's horizons to something new that you're selling, especially if it didn't have the same brand name cachet as it should now.
Exactly. Just awareness. Like it gives it extra incentive to go learn about it, understand the go-to-market, and sort of brings that go-to-market engine closer together. That's exactly right.
And what metrics do you like to look at to gauge rep productivity other than quota attainment? Let's just say in period. What are you pulling up on your dashboard?
Yeah, I mean, we look at productivity per rep, so it's a measure of MRR at a rep level. That's, again, the lagging indicator. When you sort of go upstream, we're looking at deal creation is a big one. We're looking at what pipeline creation looks like across the different sources of pipeline we have. So it's really tracing it all the way back up. Deal creation, pipeline, opportunities, and then all the way up to activities that the rep is actually doing to go create demand, create those opportunities, and then what does progression and close activity look like? So it's really backing the train up to understand, like, what are the inputs that lead to these outputs given a set of close rates or ASPs or a type of end sales velocity, right? So taking those factors into account, where would you go? Where should you go expect? It's going to be different. Different reps may have different areas where they need help or coaching. So that gives a diagnostic. If you sort of take a lens of that entire sales cycle across your different reps, these are the analytics we really try to arm our reps and sales managers with. Where to go help with coaching. You use things like conversational intelligence to go, tools like Gong to go look at where, what does your discovery call sound like? Where are you asking the right questions? What does your conversion from meeting to opportunity look like? You start to marry the qualitative with the quantitative, and you start to give the manager, sales directors, like a real, sort of like bird's eye view and lens into where to go focus from a coaching standpoint and from an enablement standpoint. So those are just a couple of areas that we go look at. And then for customer success would be a different set of metrics, but you're ultimately looking at what's a measure of customer value for your business, and is it usage, utilization? What does that look like, and how do you get a really, really deep understanding of whether your customers are getting the value that they expected? And and then from there, looking at what are the activities we can take as an org to deliver upon those engagements and so forth. So it all depends is really the answer, but work backwards from what that the lagging indicator is, or the output metric.
Sid, I like how you described it as a diagnostics test or a diagnostics dashboard, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're looking at, hey, I'm going to go deeper than quota here, which is usually what you talk about at the board level and a lot of meetings probably with the peers in your leadership team. But you have to go a step deeper than that and say, well, what are the activities that are creating this? And you pointed out that it's usually multiple things depending on what type of sales cycle it is and what type of segment you're selling into. Very much.
I think you have to be thoughtful about that.
What I'm going to do here is take us into what we like to call our long ass lightning round. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, I ask everybody, what's an example of something you've messed up before in your career? What's something you've screwed up on the job before?
Yeah, I think I gave you one example earlier. I'll just elaborate on that. There was a business where we went into the year thinking we had a set of expectations around this business, and for that business came in at sub 50% of plan on that particular business. And mid-year, I had to go course correct with reallocating resources and reallocating the entire strategy. Middle of the year, it was just painful to do at a global scale. So that was one just sticks with me. Not panning out as expected, and having to do some real-time course corrections while the plane flying.
It's funny. I bet everyone listening to this call right now is thinking about that one planning cycle that went off the rails. Like, I'm thinking of one from like 2018, I think, that I'm just like, oh, like I still feel that pit in my stomach. Like I that one didn't play out in like APJ like I planned.
Exactly. This sounds like around that same time frame. So maybe same year.
That's good. Okay. You're very analytical. You seem to be pretty on top of using the best tools. I already heard you mention Gong. What's your current tool stack look like right now? What are you using to get the job done?
We run our business on HubSpot, really end to end. I think part of that is it goes back to end to end visibility of the customer. So between our marketing hub, our sales hub, our service hub, it gives us that single view of our customers across our different teams. So the more we can have our sales team looking at the same data as our customer success team and as our marketing team, the better off we are. Now, there's different specialized tools that each team has to go do different aspects of their jobs. Like there's a whole MarTech stack. We do use Gong. Conversational intelligence wise, I think it goes back to that. I think conversational intelligence, I think, is so valuable because it marries the qualitative with the quantitative and helps you understand what are those different signals, and things are just getting way more accessible in terms of the plethora of insights with AI and being able to summarize those and understanding what are the different levers or touch points that signal that you may need to adjust positioning or you may need to enable in a specific area more. So I'm of the mindset of like fewer, more consolidated tools rather than lots of different point tools to go do the job. It keeps the reps in one place with a unified experience. And also from a supporting the reps and the teams, like we're operating out of a fewer number of systems to go do that. And so that's a plug for Sales Hub and HubSpot there. So
what's the most recent tool you bought for either the sales team, customer success team, or could even be for your own team?
Again, we've been really looking at where are we using existing things, to be totally honest. We use one of the tools we use, and we're expanding our usage of is Anaplan. And we do that to really look at getting an end-to-end view of connected planning, which you don't want to plan in terms of a sales, marketing, and customer success. We have an integrated planning team already that we brought together about a year ago, but I think really thinking about scenario-based planning and that integration and alignment with FP&A, that is a real, it's not a rep-facing tool, but something that I think we find value in terms of being able to see that scenario-based view and look at what the different puts and takes are. So there's one example.
Anaplans came up a couple times in the pod, so that's a good one. Sid, you've worked with and partnered with some high-profile CFOs at places like CA, Amazon, and HubSpot. I got to ask, what do you think are the qualities that separate a good CFO from a great CFO?
It's a great question. I think it's the ability to clearly communicate to multiple different stakeholders what they need to understand from their vantage point, and how do you get the organization driving behind those objectives. Our CFO here, Kate Buger, is one of the clearest communicators, and I walk away from every town hall meeting with just extreme clarity on what to know and how to think about it. I think it's a superpower of hers. So I think communication is an underestimated or probably not represented as maybe a top one, but I think it's so important. You have so many stakeholders as a CFO, and then aligning really closely with the business to as a business partner to help achieve the outcomes, right? Versus sort of stepping back. And I think that's again, another example of really getting close to the business and then seeing what are the puts and takes to be able to go make those different trade-offs.
That's a different permutation of communication than we usually get. And I'm always somebody who's beating the drum of storytelling, which I do think is a very key quality of CFOs.
Another way of getting at it, yeah.
But clarity is an amazing way to put it, because it's giving me less very clearly, not more. It's like, you give me 10 things, you gave me nothing. But if you gave me 2 or 3 things to work on, okay, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, and I think it's thinking about, like, if you vision a rep in APJ hearing this message, what do they take away from it? That's, you think about, where is this going outside of people who understand or in the finance function or the ops function, might be closer to the numbers. Like, what is the broad-based organization going to take away from the message? And is that clear? Simplicity scales. That's how I think about it.
That's a good bumper sticker. Okay, last question I got for you. Hypothetically speaking, of course, what's the largest commission check you've ever heard a rep getting on a single deal?
Back in one of my prior roles, I had probably a 1.2-ish. Yeah, like north of $1 million.
One deal. Damn.
Yeah. Well, again, this is, large enterprise deal, multi-year, so.
End of year accelerators.
Yeah, probably got into that very quickly. It was top of the President's Club list, that type of thing. So that was a long time back, but I remember that. It was, then, you look at that and like, wow, it took a lot to get that too. So you just learn that. So
it's funny because a lot of CFOs cringe when you talk about writing a big check, but I look at that as free marketing, free publicity of look what you can do.
100%. It's, it goes back to our earlier conversation. If you set the right incentives and you want to drive the right outcomes, you should be happy about that payment, because you delivered on that and more. Maybe you learned something from it and you need to tweak things for the following.
Yeah, that's the other side of it.
You might adjust that person's quota, but I think at a macro level, I think it's you probably check the box on that.
Yeah, Sid, thanks. This has been an awesome jam session on all things RevOps. Appreciate it.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Roll the credits, producer Nancy. The Run the Numbers podcast is part of the Turpentine network of podcasts. It is produced by Nancy Hsu and edited by Justin Golden. Artwork made by Some AI Thing. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. Don't forget to give us 5 stars. I really need this.